Hi everyone, welcome to week 4. This week we're doing equilibrium. You'll recall that in the previous week, last week, we did demand. The week before that we did supply. And I think at this point you've probably looked at equilibrium a little bit anyway, but we're going to drill down into this concept more today. And we're going to put demand and supply together. So what we've got to keep in mind while we do this topic is that we're still assuming, as we did from the very first, that we are in perfect competition. And that means that our market is divided, it is comprised of many individual demanders, and each of those demanders demands the product based on what their marginal utility for that product is, and they try and equate the marginal utility for that product with the price of the product, bearing in mind that they could also buy other products instead. So they're weighing the marginal utility up against the price. That's the demanders, but each demander is different. But in perfect competition, the total market demand is comprised of many individual buyers. And likewise, the total market supply is made up of many individual sellers, and each of them may have slightly different marginal costs. And the decisions that they make are as well based on the price, and they need a price that will cover the marginal cost in order for them to supply the goods. So that's really where we're starting today, and we're going to start by looking at the market demand curve and what makes that market demand curve up. So remember that we are in a model. The model is simplifying the real world reality, and although we know that the market demand is made up of hundreds, maybe thousands of buyers, we're just going to be looking at 2 buyers when we look at our market demand, and we're also only going to be looking at 2 sellers when we look at our market supply. But what we're trying to see is the connection between the individual demand and the total market demand, and the individual supply and the total market supply. So let's get into it now. We'll move over to our slides. Forgive me here. All right, forgive me there. It just took me a little while to get the my screen right, because I'm working on just a single screen device. It's a bit klutzy in what I can see and translating that to what you can see. In any case, we can see the slides in front of us now. We've moved to the second slide, and what we're looking at in our second slide is our demand curve, our supply curve and demand curve. We're going to be looking initially at the supply curve, and what we can see is our 2 left panels have the supply curve for 2 different suppliers. In the red, it's the supply curve of Thai, and in the black. In the red is the supply curve for TO. And these are two different suppliers, and they have two different marginal cost curves. So Thai has a slightly less elastic supply curve, and Theo has a slightly more elastic supply curve. Why would he have a slightly more elastic supply curve? Perhaps he is able to get hold of resources more easily than the other supplier, so that if he needs to expand his supply, he can do that faster and cheaper than the other supplier. In any case, these two suppliers both contribute to market supply. And if we just take the prices one at a time, if we think about the price at one, it pays Thai to supply one good. So we just put a little horizontal line to show Thai supplying one good at $1. And then for Theo, he supplies at the same $1, he can supply two goods. So if I just add one good and two goods together, in the total market supply at $1, the total market supply is 2 plus 1, or should I say 1 plus 2. So there is Thai. There is Thai, there's Tio, and there's the total market supply. Now, what we have done here is that we've been adding the horizontal intervals. We've been adding the two green lines together to get on the market supply. You can see I'm just making that a little bit heavier now. There's the market supply. It's the sum of the two previous ones. If we then go up a price, we can see that we're moving up Thai's curve. We're also moving up Theo's supply curve. So both of these guys are obeying the law of supply. But now at price 1, the black interval is now 2. And for Theo, the black interval is now 4. So when we come over to the market supply, we can see at price 2, the total market supply is 6, which is just made up of 2 from Thai and 4 from Theo. So the key point to remember this is that we are adding horizontally. What we are not doing is getting $2 from Thai and $2 from Tio and then marking $4 over on the market supply curve. We are not doing that. We're adding the horizontal distances. We're adding the black line, the second black line, we add that in. And then we go over to the market supply curve on the right. So the market supply is made up of the individual supply curves. Not all supply curves are the same. Different suppliers will have different supply curves, but the market supply is the total of all the individuals together. When we go down to the next line, it's the same concept. So you can see, let's pick the low price at $2. Ting supplies 2 goods, and at $2, buys 2 goods. At the same $2, Leo buys 4 goods. So the total is just 2 plus 4. And then we've got 2 plus 4 equals 6. So it's just we're adding horizontally. Why would it be that that Leo demands more than Ting? Well, only two reasons really. One, this product offers more satisfaction to Leo than Ting, or it might be as simple as Leo has more money available to him than Ting. In any case, when the price rises from 2 to 4, at 4 we move up the line, and now we see that Ting buys 1 and Leo buys 2. Right, so here we've just got 2 plus 1 equals 3. So each individual demand curve obeys the law of demand. The market demand curve also obeys the law of demand, and the total of the demand market demand is just the aggregate of the individual demanders all added together. So that's how we define the terms aggregate demand and supply. I'd just point out here, aggregate demand also has a meaning in macroeconomics, which is a bit different to our the way that we use it in microeconomics. So we can use the term aggregate demand and supply. We could also use the term market demand and supply. So we market demand and supply. And what are we doing? We're just adding the horizontal sum of the individual demand curve and supply curves. We would say at each price. At each price. So we're adding across ways, sideways. So we've now got the market demand and the market supply, and if we then put these two terms together, or these two curves together, we're going to arrive at the market equilibrium. The market equilibrium. So then we're going to put the two on the same graph. We're going to put the total market demand and the total market supply together, and what we're going to find is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So we'll skip the next slide. We'll come back to that slide, and what I'm going to do here for the purposes of the lecture is I'm going to just I'm going to copy this slide, and then I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to produce a number of copies of this slide and keep coming back to it. Okay, I've now got a few copies of the slide because I want to write a number of things on these slides. So let's start at the top. So first of all, we've got market equilibrium. Now the market equilibrium will be here. There's the market equilibrium. And we'd say one thing that we can say about this market equilibrium is that the market finds its own equilibrium. What does that mean? What it means is no one is telling the market what price to charge or what price to accept. So in particular, what we're assuming, I'll get you to, yes, in particular what we're assuming is that there is no government. We're assuming that there is no government involved here. The government is not setting the price. The government is not setting the output. The market finds its price. I want you to imagine a market that's operating right now, and that would be the share market. If you pick any big company in the share market, imagine a big company like Telstra, its shares will be traded on the share market today. There will be many people thinking about selling their shares in Telstra. There will be many other people thinking about buying shares in Telstra. That share price will move today, and it will find a different equilibrium this afternoon than the equilibrium yesterday afternoon. But no one in the share market telling anybody what the market price will be. The way that market price will move is that if there's more demanders today than there are suppliers today, the price will move up. If there is more suppliers today than demanders, the price will move down. But no one in the share market is actually controlling that price. So let's move on. Let's have a look at this slide now. We've got a clean copy of the slide. We just looked at the market equilibrium. Now I'm looking at a price above the equilibrium. So I call this point disequilibrium. In other words, we're not in equilibrium. And the issue for the market here is that this market price, at this price is above the price, the equilibrium price. We know what the equilibrium price is. What's going to happen at this price? Let's trace across at this price and think about the behavior of demanders and suppliers at this price. At this price, it's a high price, so it's very attractive to sellers of the product. So the quantity that the sellers will offer sale will be QS. They'll want to sell the product. They'll be wanting to make the product for 2 and sell many units of the product. That's what the sellers want to do. What the demanders want to do, because the price is so high, the quantity demanded is much lower. So as a result, we have excess supply. In other words, at 2, the quantity of supply is greater than the quantity of demand. The quantity of supply is greater than the quantity of demand. And so this is a problem for the sellers, because they can't find enough people to buy their product. So what happens in the market is this, that there is competition between sellers. The sellers start competing with one another. There's competition between the sellers, and as a result of that competition between the sellers, how am I going to sell my product before any other seller sells their product? Well, the result will be, of course, that the price will have to drop. Some sellers will drop out of the market. Some sellers will decide not to sell the product as a result of this. So the price is now going to fall. So the price cannot stay at 2. The price will start to fall. And then think about, well, we'll come down to the next slide now. If the price is starting to fall, then these sellers now find it less attractive to sell. So as the price falls, so we could say as the price falls, the quantity for sale, quantity being supplied, also falls, and we move rightwards down this curve. There's less people selling the goods. And in the same way, as the price falls, the quantity being demanded rises. So there's a movement along the curve this way. And imagine that we do get to a price where I'm indicating it's still above the equilibrium price. So even at the red price, the quantity being demanded, I'm making a dot, the quantity being supplied, I'm making another dot, you can see that the quantity being demanded is still greater than the quantity being supplied. There's still an excess supply, and so the price will fall again. Right? The price will fall again, and only when it gets to the equilibrium. What's going on at the equilibrium? Now, the quantity being demanded is equal to the quantity being supplied, and there's nothing to force any change. There's no force now to force a change because there's no excess supply causing firms to compete against one another and drive the price down. So that's how we get from 2. I'll circle 2. That's how we get from 2 down to the equilibrium price. No government official said you must lower the price. The market simply controlled that price change by itself, because whenever there was an excess supply, that excess supply forces price to fall. So that's what's going on when the market is above, market price is above the equilibrium. What about when the market price is below the equilibrium? What's happening down here? What's going on down at the bottom is that now the market price, right, the quantity being supplied is very small. The quantity being demanded is very big. So here's the quantity being demanded here. Here's the quantity being supplied on the left. You can see that there's now more demand than there is supply. There's more demand than there is supply. And so now, at this price, right, at this price, we'd say at price below equilibrium, we don't have competition among suppliers anymore. Now we have competition by demanders, right? Competition by demanders, and that forces the price up. So here's the price. The price starts to rise. Price starts to rise because there's not enough goods for people to buy. Over on the left-hand side, I'm circling. There's only this much for sale, circling in green, but on the right-hand side, the buyers want a lot more than is for sale. So they have to push the other buyers out of the road and to try and get to the product. And of course, the way that they do that is by offering more money. So when that happens, the price starts to rise. So here's the price going up. The quantity demanded rises. The quantity supplied rises. And over on the left-hand side, as the price starts to rise, the quantity demanded falls. And in the end, they come into balance at the equilibrium. And what's going on at the equilibrium? That's where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. So, the short way to summarize all that. Short way to summarize all that is to say that in a perfect competition, no one is controlling the market at all. There's simply demanders and suppliers offering their goods at a variety of prices. If the price is at a point where the quantity being supplied is greater than the quantity being demanded, that indicates that the market isn't in equilibrium and the price will change. And as the price changes, as the price falls, some of the buyers simply don't offer the good for sale anymore. They drop out, and demanders start to drop into the market. So that's the first big lesson about equilibrium. No one controls it. And everyone is a price taker in that market. So back to our slides. So we have this slide in front of us. I'm not going to spend long on this slide really, except that we're imagining in that market that we just looked at that there's a variety of sellers. There's a variety of sellers. We don't think of just supply. We think of all the individuals making up that supply. And these individuals all have a reservation price. So we need to think about this issue of the reservation price. The reservation price, I'm going to go to the slide that defines the reservation price quickly, and then I'll come back to it. So the reservation price is not the price in the market. So the reservation price is not the equilibrium price in the market. The reservation price is, in the case of a buyer, the reservation price is the highest price that the buyer is willing to pay for a given good. The price that they are willing to pay. It's not the price that they do pay, it's the price that they're willing to pay. I'll bring up the diagram in a minute to illustrate a bit more clearly what I mean. And in the case of a reservation, and this reservation price that they are willing to pay is equal to their marginal utility, equal to how much satisfaction the buyer is getting from the product. So if something gives you a lot of satisfaction, you really enjoy it, or you really need it, you're going to be prepared to pay more for it. If something is less satisfying, it's lower quality, or you kind of like it, but you don't crave it, your reservation price will be lower. Now, what's the reservation price of the seller going to be equal to? The reservation price of the seller will be equal to their marginal cost. So a couple of things to note about those terms, right? We're looking at the term marginal and marginal in each case. The seller wants to cover the cost. The seller that needs a price that will cover their cost. The buyer wants an amount of utility that will be at least equal to or more than the price that they pay for the product. So the utility is related to the reservation prices of the buyer and seller. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean here. So what we essentially have is a demand curve, a downward sloping demand curve made up of 5 buyers. And then we have a supply curve made up of 5 sellers. What can I assume about buyer 5? Right? What can I assume about buyer 5? Well, one is they have a low reservation price. My pen's suddenly stopped working. See if I can change colours and see if I can do any good. It's not responding at all. My drawing function is not responding. Turn it back on. Okay, low reservation price. And then over here, our sellers, right? This this seller up here, they have a high reservation price. So if I think about buyer 5 and seller 5, buyer 5 will only buy the product if the price is low, and seller 5 will only sell the product if the price is high. That's the way that we think about these buyers and sellers in the market. I'm going to clean this slide up a bit. And I'm going to go forward a few slides because I've actually given these buyers and sellers names. So here is the individual buyers and sellers in the market. So let's start with James. James, why does James have a higher reservation price, for example, than Hannah? Why does James have a higher reservation price than Hannah? Well, two things. One is maybe the product gives James more marginal utility. Maybe James really loves the product more than Hannah loves the product. So he's willing to pay more for it. Or it might simply be this. Maybe James has a higher income than Hannah. Maybe James is wealthier than Hannah. We don't know why James would be willing to pay more for the price than Hannah. What we do know is that he's got a reservation price, which would indicate if he had to pay it, he would pay it. So I want you to really concentrate on this idea of the reservation price. Imagine that here at the uni, you have a queue of people all waiting in line to buy their coffee at a given coffee outlet. Not all those people are the same. Some of them have more income and therefore they would be willing to pay a higher price for the coffee. Or maybe some of them are simply more addicted to coffee in the morning and are more willing to pay a higher reservation price. We don't really know why they are willing to pay it. But what we do know is that if we were to negotiate with all of those individual people in the line for the coffee, if we were to negotiate the maximum price that they would pay, we would be able to get a different price from every one of those consumers. And that's why I've given those consumers names on the slide, because we're imagining that James, he's got a high reservation price. And although he might be prepared to pay $8 for a coffee, that's not the price of the coffee. The price of the coffee might be $4. So James is willing to pay, if he had to pay, if we could negotiate with James one-on-one, we'd get $8 out of him. But that's not what happens. The price is set at $4 and James pays $4. How do you know that how do we know that James's reservation price is well above $4? We don't do this. We don't say about James, oh, what's your reservation price and what's the price and what's the difference? No one does that. But the way you can tell if someone has a reservation price above the existing price is simply when they go to buy it. They buy it and it's not a problem to them. They're not wrestling with the decision because they're quite comfortable with paying that price. And so we could assume, well, it's above their reservation price is certainly below and maybe a fair bit below the price that is actually being charged. Where you know that you are about the level of your reservation price is when you are hesitating to buy the product. You're about to buy the product, you look at the price of the product, and what you are asking yourself is this: is it really worth it? If you're asking yourself that question, you're close to your reservation price. If people are buying the product and they're not even thinking that thought about whether it's worth the product price, they're just buying it without caring too much, their reservation price is comfortably above the existing price. How do I know someone whose reservation price is below the existing price? That's very clear, because that person won't buy the product. If their reservation price is 2 and the price of the coffee is 3, they simply walk past it. They simply move on, and they spend their $2 on something else. So that's how we could that's the way we could think about reservation prices relative to prices. So let's go back to the slide and then think about this issue of whether people are going to be changing their behaviour or not. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. Okay, so we know that these are the things we know so far. Marginal utility determines the demand. Marginal utility determines person's individual demand, and the marginal cost determines the firm's individual supply. We also know that the market is going to find its way to equilibrium. So let's think about what would happen if the price was 3. If the price is 3, then Amy wants to buy the product. If the price is 5, Amy wants to buy it, James wants to buy it. Who wants to sell it? This is who wants to sell it. This seller up here, whatever their name is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They want to sell the product. They're all happy to sell the product at 5. So at price 5, what's going on? The quantity demanded is 2. The quantity being supplied is 5. There's an excess supply. 3 of these guys will not get to sell the product. So how are we going to decide which ones won't sell it? They're going to have to compete with each other. And when they start to compete, the price falls. The price falls. So we know that eventually the market is going to arrive at the equilibrium price. We know that the market will arrive at 3. And at 3, what happens? At 3, what happens? One extra buyer jumps in. Charles jumps in to buy the product, and 2 sellers leave. Peter and the other seller, they both leave, and in the end, the market arrives at equilibrium. So if we come down to these other slides, we can see that at this price, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, and people have a tendency to change their behaviour at that level. But when we're simply at an equilibrium of 3, the quantity demanded is 3, and the quantity supplied is 3, and the price is 3. So we've got a quantity demanded and a quantity supplied. They are both equal. So at the equilibrium, quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. And not only that, at quantity 3, the price of the seller is equal to the price of the demander. So that's what's going on at equilibrium. So then, when we look at this again, I'm going to clean this up. When we look at this again, we're at equilibrium. I want you to think about who's involved in this transaction. Who's involved in this transaction at equilibrium? We'll go back and we'll give them names again. So think about James. Here's our equilibrium. We'll come back to Charles and Kate in a minute. I want you to think about James. James had a reservation price of 6, but the market price was 3. Everyone is paying that price. Everyone is paying that price. James is paying it. Amy's paying it. and Charles is paying it. So they're all paying. They're not paying different prices. They're all paying 3. So as far as James is concerned, I would say that James has got that product cheap because he was prepared to pay 6, but he got it for 3. He never probably consciously thought that, but he's quite comfortable with the $3. And then the second buyer, which is Amy, she was prepared to pay 5, but she actually paid 3 as well. So she has the difference between her reservation price and her price is called her consumer surplus. So we're going to look at, when we move slides, what is the reservation price minus the price? What do we call that? Right? The reservation price minus the price, that equals your consumer surplus. We've got a definition of this on the next slide or two. That's their consumer surplus. And if we think about the total consumer surplus here, it's 3 plus 2. 3 plus 2. That's the total consumer surplus. 5. I want you to contemplate Charles for a minute. Charles's reservation price was 3 and the price is 3. So Charles will buy the product, but whereas Amy and James are quite comfortable paying 3, Charles, he's right on the edge. If the price is any higher than 3, he's not buying the product. Now, at the same time, the sellers also, we have to think about the sellers and their surplus. So we go to a clean slide. Here's our reservation price. Our first seller was prepared to accept, their marginal cost is 1. If they can get 3 for the product, then what if they can get 3 for the product, we express it like this. We say there is the price of the product. We subtract the marginal cost or the reservation price, and that is called the producer surplus. That's the producer surplus. They're quite happy because they've got a cost of 1 and a price of 3. So their consumer surplus is 2. And then the next seller, they've got a marginal cost, a reservation price of 2, and they've got a price of 3. So they've got a surplus of 1. So the producer surplus is 2 for the first producer and 1 for the second producer, and that adds up to 3. And then if we think about putting all of this together, I'll just skip a slide. If we think about putting all this together, we have an equilibrium price. We have 3 going on for the first buyer, 2 going on for the second buyer. So our consumer surplus equals 5. And when we think about our producer surplus, we've got 2 plus 1. So our producer surplus equals 3. So the total surplus equals 8. The total surplus in the market equals 8. I'm going to go forward. I'm going to skip a couple of slides forward here. And what we're going to do here is just colour this in. This might sound like a bit of a baby thing to do, but remember our first our first consumer had a surplus of 3. Our second had a surplus of 2. So that combined area looks kind of like this. And we shade all that in. Right, that equals our consumer, that's a C, our consumer surplus. That's our consumer surplus. And then over on the left-hand side, we've got 2 and 1. So we've got something that looks a bit like this. Right, that equals our producer surplus. And so we've coloured it in. Now the colouring in will make a bit more sense when we move to some later slides. So we've got our consumer surplus and our producer surplus. So let's go back and we'll find some definitions, and we'll just go through these terms very quickly. So what is the consumer surplus? It represents the difference between what the consumer pays and what they are willing to pay. In other words, it's the reservation price minus the actual equilibrium price. That's what the consumer surplus is. And then for the producer surplus, it represents the difference between the price that the seller receives and what they are willing to receive. So how do we express this? We express it in the reverses of the consumer surplus. That's the equilibrium price minus the reservation price. So that's what we mean by our consumer surplus and producer surplus. And then we're just looking at what happens at disequilibrium. At disequilibrium, people are tempted to change their behaviour, because if the price is here at 5, then at this point, why are people tempted to change their behaviour at 5? Because at 5, the sellers are not tempted to change their behaviour. The buyers are not tempted to change their behaviour, but the sellers are. Three sellers will drop out if the price is 5. So they're going to change their behaviour. They're not going to be in the market anymore. The buyers will drop out. Change that again. Excuse me. If the price is 5, then these sellers will drop out. These buyers will drop out of the market. When the price falls, then the sellers drop out a bit, the buyers drop in, and then we arrive at this point where at the $3, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, and at that point, no one is dropping in. Right? No one is dropping into the market. No one is dropping out of the market at that point. And therefore, we'd say that the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal, and they are also stable. If nothing else happens, the price will not move from 3. The price will stay at 3. Because now the market is in equilibrium. So there's nothing to force the price up, and there's nothing to force the price down. Okay, now I want to just talk a bit more about this term equilibrium, though. Think about this equilibrium. 3 people buy the product, and 3 people sell the product, and the price is 3. 3 people buy it, 3 people sell it, the price is 3. Does that mean everyone's happy? It does not mean everyone's happy. But sometimes textbooks say this: the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, and therefore there's no shortage. Right? Therefore, there's no shortage in the market. It doesn't mean that everyone is satisfied. What it means is that the quantity is 3 for demand and the quantity is 3 for supply. But what about these buyers over here? They're not buying the product. They're missing out on the product completely. So when we say there's no shortage, it doesn't mean everyone is getting everything that they want. It just means that the quantity and the demand and the supply are equal. So there's no shortage to make the price rise. There's no shortage in that sense. It doesn't mean everyone is happy, because these buyers, these people, these miss out. So buyer 4 and buyer 5, they miss out because they're not getting the product, and seller 4 and seller 5, they miss out because they're not getting to sell the product. So when we say there's no shortage, we're not saying there's no problem. We're just saying the demand equals supply and the price isn't changing. That's what we mean when we say there's no shortage or surplus. Okay, so the total consumer surplus represents the sum of the individual consumers. We did that on the next slide. We just coloured the two, buyer 1 and buyer 2. The total producer surplus represents the sum of economic surplus of all the producers. Again, we did it on the next slide. We looked at producer 1 and consumer 2. So, and then the total surplus, of course, the total surplus is all the area together. So what's the total surplus? The total surplus is all of this that I'm colouring, I'm bordering here. So that's the total surplus, consumer surplus and producer surplus together. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes left. So I want to talk to you then again about this statement here. In a perfectly competitive market, the total surplus is maximised exactly where at the equilibrium price. The total surplus is maximised at the equilibrium price. Now, we can explain what that means on many levels. So I'm going to have a go on a couple of levels here for you, right? So we've got a few copies of this slide anyway, but I'm just going to reproduce it a couple of times. All right, so think about this concept. Why would we say that the total surplus is maximised at the equilibrium? Well, one way we could think about it is this. At the quantity, at that equilibrium, if we think about all the goods that we produce out to that quantity, all the goods that we're producing, the demand curve represents the price that people will be willing to pay, and we know that different demanders are willing to pay different amounts, and that is equal to their marginal utility. That's what the demand curve means. What does the supply curve mean? The supply curve, whoops, it's a mistake in labelling here, supply, demand. What does the supply curve mean? The supply curve, this indicates the marginal cost of making the goods. So we've got these two concepts, the satisfaction that the good gives us and the cost of making it. So let's imagine that we start over here, we start at good number 1. What is good number 1 delivering to the buyer of that good? The blue dot represents the satisfaction. What's the red dot represent? The red dot represents the cost of making it. So if I could make a good for a low price and give satisfaction, a lot of satisfaction to someone, if I could make the good for $1 and give someone $6 worth of marginal utility or satisfaction, we could argue that that's a good way to use our resources, right? We spend $1 and we give $6 worth of satisfaction. So that's a good way to spend the dollar. And then what about good number 2? Right, we'll come out to good number 2 here. The black dot represents the marginal utility. The red dot represents the cost. So again, the marginal utility is greater than the dollar cost of making the good. So again, that's a good way to use our resources. We're getting more utility than we are spending money. So one way that we could think about all this, right, one way we could think about this is to say, this is QE, for all goods out to QE, the marginal utility exceeds the marginal cost. Marginal utility exceeds the marginal cost. I can't fit the C in there. There's the marginal cost. So we're getting more value for every good that we make than we spend in making the good. So this is a good way to use resources, right? If I can get this much satisfaction for this much money, that's a good use of money. So we say all of those goods are worth making. And if we ask the buyer this, would you be willing to pay the cost of producing the good that we're about to provide you? All of those buyers would say, yeah, right, sure, I'm willing to pay the cost, because the cost is less than the satisfaction then I'll receive. So yeah, that's a good way to spend money. Make the good on my behalf, then sell it to me and recover your marginal cost. So the buyers would be happy to finance all those goods. However, what about this? What about outputs that are different to the equilibrium? Like, what if we go to this output and I say, well, let's not go to QE, right? Let's not go to QE. There's a dot for QE. Let's go to here, right? Let's go to Q1. What's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is that all of these goods between QE and Q1, all of those goods have a higher marginal cost than they have a marginal utility. So now we're spending this much money, right? We're spending this much money to provide this utility. So like saying, oh, look, I'll spend $8 making you a coffee that you only think's worth $4. That would be a dumb way to use resources. A better way to think about things is, if I was going to make products, we were going to make products out at this level, we'd be better to spend this money on making another product, not making this product. So making more than making goods where the marginal cost is greater than the marginal utility, it's not a good use of our scarce resources. What if we take the reverse case? What is wrong with this output? Right? What's wrong with Q2? Now, for all the goods out to Q2, there's our marginal utility and there's our marginal cost, and all of these goods are giving surplus. some of that surplus is consumer surplus, some of that surplus is producer surplus. If we wanted to put a number here, we could say this number is 8, and this number is 2, and this number might be 5. So there's $6 worth of surplus in here, $6 worth of surplus, and it's shared between the consumer, 3, and producers, 3. Right? That's the situation for that good that I've indicated there. And that would be the case, that situation would be the case, that situation would be the case for all products that we produce out to Q2. We're not concerned with those goods. What we're concerned with is the goods we are not producing. So this is QE. If we're producing at Q2, I'll just clean this up a little bit. If we're producing at Q2, we are not producing these products that I'm indicating along the bottom, right? These products don't exist. Those products don't exist. And what that means is that there was potential to make some products where the marginal utility was greater than the marginal cost, and we didn't exploit that opportunity. Right? We gave up that opportunity. We missed these goods. These goods don't exist. No one got to make them. No one got to buy them, and so that is also inefficient, and that will deliver less satisfaction than if we were to produce at the equilibrium. So I'm going to finish off here. I'm going to finish off by just giving you an example. I'm going to jump forward 1 week here. I know we've got a lecture on Thursday, but I want to give you just a little hint about how we might arrive at a situation where only Q2 was produced. Imagine for a moment that the government designated a price and said the price must be at P. Now, if the government's saying the price has to be at P and that the equilibrium price is not legal, it's not legal to charge that price, we call this a ceiling price. And what they're trying to do here is keep the price low for consumers so that everyone can buy the product, right? So that everyone has access to buy the product. So if they put the price at C, suppliers will only make this quantity.
Your camera's.
Oh shit! Sorry. Apologies for that. Alex has just come into the room to tell me that I'm not actually visible to you. So I'll shift back to the slides now, and I'll re-explain what I was doing there. So I'll just clean this up and just explain this briefly to you again. So imagine a situation in which our supply is at Q2. How could we get to that situation? We could get to that situation if the government designates that the price is at Q2. If they nominate the price at PC, suppliers will only make Q2, and that means that demanders can only buy Q2, and therefore the demanders are missing out on these goods. The demanders are missing out on these goods here. So here is the marginal utility that each good offers. Here is the marginal cost. The buyers would be happy to buy these products and pay the marginal cost of production. However, they're not getting that opportunity to do it because the market is not being allowed to adjust to the equilibrium. So this is less than efficient because the market is not arriving at the equilibrium output. So if we go back to our previous slides, we can see that. We can see that at the equilibrium. Why is the equilibrium most efficient? Because out to all levels of production, out to the equilibrium, at all levels out to the equilibrium, I'm having trouble getting my pen working here. At all levels of production out to the equilibrium, the marginal utility will be greater than the marginal cost. There will be a surplus for every product out to the equilibrium. There'll be a surplus all the way out there. However, if we have a policy where the production is cut off short of the equilibrium, then these goods will no longer exist. No one will make them. Buyers don't get a chance to sell them. Buyers don't get a chance to buy them. Sellers don't get a chance to sell them. And therefore the market is missing out on these goods. And so now the consumer surplus has disappeared. And I'll just revisit the slide that you didn't get to see before. I did talk you through it. But likewise, if the production is greater than the equilibrium, this doesn't make any sense either, because now at every output above QE, the level of marginal cost is greater than the level of marginal utility. So to summarise all of this then, we'd say that consumer surplus and producer surplus needs to arrive at the market equilibrium for these surpluses to be maximised. So I'm going to end the lecture there. I apologise for the last few minutes there where I was talking to you and you didn't actually see the slides. If you play the sound back and then just have the slides downloaded from Moodle, you will be able to retrace and put together my explanation and the actual slides. So I'm going to end the lecture there. We're going to pick up on Thursday. We're going to go from the market equilibrium. We're going to then look at how individual firms respond to that market equilibrium price, and then transition all that into the long run. So I'll leave it there today, and I'll see you all again on Thursday.